Greetings, my friends. Today, I'm going to read a story about chasing your dreams. So won't you please turn on your listening ears and practice focusing, visualizing, and drawing your own conclusions about this story, which requires no title. Let's begin. Gyro had an identical dream nearly every night. In his dream, Gyro leapt across the rocky surface of the moon in gigantic bounces. He had learned on TV that this is what astronauts do. A scientist said this is possible because there is less gravity on the moon than on the Earth. Objects, even living ones like astronauts in their moon suits, don't fall to the ground as quickly as they would here in our world. So they can bounce very high and come down very slowly. This sounded fun to Gyro. He thought about it a lot. That's probably why it infiltrated his subconscious at night. Gyro had other dreams too, like one where his feet were stuck to the ground and he couldn't run away from the enormous ants that chased him and wanted to carry him away to their tunnels. But this was not a pleasant dream. He would much rather dream about running and jumping on the moon. Gyro was in second grade. His teacher was Mrs. Feeney. Mrs. Feeney gave the class a writing assignment. It began with a question, called a prompt. What is your dream? How are you going to achieve it? Some students began writing immediately. Some of them thought for a little while before picking up their pencils. Gyro was one of the thinkers. I have multiple dreams, he thought, in a simplified inner monologue. But I guess I have to pick one. I don't want to achieve the dream about being chased by large insects. So I'll make the executive decision to write about my dream of bouncing on the moon. I will achieve this dream by becoming an astronaut. Gyro volunteered to read his essay to the class. It wasn't very long. Mrs. Feeney had some follow-up questions. What do you think you'll have to do to become an astronaut? Go to space camp? Gyro replied, as if he was unsure of the answer. He was, in fact, unsure of the answer. But he felt pretty sure that it required some sort of practice, and space camp might be the place to practice. That could help, said Mrs. Feeney. What skills does an astronaut need to have? 3 students guessed. They need to wear a spacesuit, said one. Okay, sure, said Mrs. Feeney. Tell me more. They need to eat space food, answered another student. Yes, but what kinds of things do they need to know? How to drive a rocket, replied a third. And what kind of knowledge would an astronaut need in order to do that? Gyro had one of those thoughts you don't quite know you're thinking, but you sort of feel it. I'm only 7 years old. How am I supposed to know what knowledge it takes to drive a rocket? Gyro, what do you think? Asked Mrs. Feeney. Science? Good, science. Okay, what else? The teacher responded. Math? Gyro thought to himself, but he didn't say it because he wasn't quite sure why you would need math skills to drive a rocket. No one else said anything until Mrs. Feeney spoke up. What about math? Do you think numbers are involved in calculating the path to the moon? Yes, said Gyro. Gyro was pleased to hear that achieving his dream wasn't as complicated as he had feared. After all, he already had classes in math and science, so he figured he would probably pass the test to be an astronaut. Besides, if his skills weren't strong enough to drive the rocket, he could certainly just be the guy who gets out and jumps around, like how Michael Collins dropped off Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to explore the moon. Gyro felt happy that he might actually achieve his dream. Gyro drew pictures of rockets and astronauts and lunar landers. Usually when he showed them to grown-ups, they would ask if he was going to be an astronaut someday, and when he said yes, they'd tell him he was going to be a great astronaut. As the months went by, Gyro became more and more confident that his dream would come true. If you can dream it, you can do it, he heard a successful person on TV say. Of course, that meant there would be a lot of astronauts, presidents, and probably an unsustainable number of veterinarians from his second grade class in the next generation's workforce. But the experts had spoken. Make your dream come true, another smart person on TV proclaimed. I believe in you. Reach for the stars. Gyro didn't even need to reach the stars. He only wanted to get to the moon. With the blessing of televised adults, he decided to get to work. Gyro began gathering supplies to build a rocket, which would undoubtedly carry him to the moon. He started by assembling the frontal cone, then the cabin. The frontal cone was an orange traffic cone which had washed up on the muddy embankment next to the creek a quarter mile from his house, and which he had hauled back to his house out of pure willpower and desire to land on the moon. The cone was duct taped to the lid of a metal trash can. The cabin was prone to overheat from sun exposure, so Gyro lined the interior with a blanket. During early trials of his rocket design, Gyro received very high praise from supposedly neutral observers. "Wow," grown-ups said as they passed by, "did you build a rocket?" "Well, not really," he said, "because it doesn't have a launch pad, supercomputers, or an engine yet, and it's probably not safe." "You have such ingenuity," one said. Gyro wasn't sure what ingenuity meant, but it sounded like maybe the ability to build an engine, so he felt good about that. Another told him he was a little Elon Musk. Gyro knew that Elon Musk was a smart guy who successfully landed a rocket back on Earth. That was high praise. Gyro felt empowered to move on to the next step, installing supercomputer technology. Gyro's parents had a few computers for different purposes. Some of them were used often. One of them was shared with Gyro under special supervision, and others were almost never used. Gyro wanted to take one of the almost never used, but he guessed that those probably weren't the most super. He didn't really want to steal from his parents at all. But he figured that as long as he landed the rocket safely back on Earth like Elon Musk, he would only be borrowing. So he yanked the family computer monitor from the desk, dragging a few tangled cords with it outside to the rocket construction site. He squeezed it into the metal cabin, which made a horrible screeching sound because it was a very tight fit. Gyro figured he could wait until he was in the air to turn it on and run the super calculations. The next task was to find an engine. Gyro knew he couldn't take the engine off of the family car, as that would be messy and dangerous. He would simply have to build one. Gyro had seen videos of rocket launches. It always looked like fire was pouring out the bottom, launching the rocket into space. He needed to make fire launch downward out the bottom of the rocket, but he didn't have a flamethrower. So he gathered all the items in the house marked flammable and placed them all in a laundry basket. Then he pried a small hole into the bottom of the laundry basket, nearly poking his eye out with scissors. It would have been easier to make the hole before loading up the items, which consisted of 3 cans of hairspray, 6 bottles of nail polish, a tin of non-dairy creamer, 2 cans of paint thinner, a bottle of cooking spray, a can of paint thinner, we already had that, that's lazy writing, and a handful of dryer lint, and that's bad reading. Gyro was smart about some things, and profoundly unsophisticated about others, on a seemingly arbitrary basis. Gyro tried using his mother's hairdryer as a thruster, but when he brought it out to the launch site for a beta test, he found that it wasn't working. Thus, he called off beta testing for the day, delaying launch preparations. That night, Gyro had a remarkable dream that he powered his rocket into the heavens by simply blowing the flames from his basket downward. When he awoke, Gyro made note of this in his astronaut's log. Flames will be propelled downward by sheer cardiovascular energy. As it has been dreamt, so shall it be done. This notation was strictly visual and colored with crayons. Gyro performed the same incision on the bottom of the trash can as he had on the laundry basket, except this time he used garden shears to poke through the metal. This would serve as the blowhole through which to redirect the force of his combustion engine, which was then taped firmly to the cabin like the thorax of one of his nightmare insects. Gyro was on an unprecedented streak of misbehavior without getting caught by his parents. If things went south during the launch, his family was surely in for a nightmare of their own with social services. This could be serious trouble for everyone. Gyro uprighted the rocket and held it in place with hockey sticks. Then he pulled his trusty toy slide with a built-in ladder up next to his launch pad, so he could easily remove the conified lid to the cabin and climb in. Gyro donned his first-grade Halloween astronaut costume and boldly returned to the launch site, clutching a box of matches and a can of gasoline. Against the better judgment of all but his unconditional supporters, he entered the vessel, shook the lid back in place the best he could, hoping it would stay affixed, and poured half a gallon of gasoline through the blowhole at his feet, dousing the flammables for increased firepower. He lowered the visor on his plastic helmet and lit the match. Determination outweighed hesitation in that crucial moment, as Gyro prepared himself a burnt offering to man's insatiable thirst for the beckoning frontier. He dropped the match through that fateful portal, and henceforth would never clearly recall what happened next. That's because he was rocked by an earthquake force explosion, which sent him and his metal trash can shell careening into the side of his family's home. Flames laced in black smoke continued to bellow from the wreckage, singeing the exteriors of 3 homes and sending the fire department scrambling to put out brush fires throughout the neighborhood. The young explorer was incredibly fortunate to escape with only a moderate concussion, acute hearing loss, and first-degree burns. For as luck should have it, the match made first contact not with the gasoline, but a less volatile object of the flammable selection perched on higher ground, breaking up the explosive sequence ever so slightly, such that Gyro was not thoroughly toasted by the ensuing blast. When he awoke in a hospital, Gyro began to question the nature of his error. Did I misremember the precise details of my dream? He thought. If only he could reconcile the failure of the dream platitude with his thwarted endeavor, he could move on to another trite mantra, like if you don't succeed, try again, in the manner of an insane person. Gyro had yet to be informed that he had caused significant property damage and legal trouble that would place irreversible strain on the family, igniting an endless cycle of traumas that could permeate his epigenetic makeup for generations to come. He only knew that he was not on the moon, and for this reason alone, his mission was a failure. The greatest tragedy of all, some speculated, was that with this stain on his juvenile record, Gyro would be ineligible to attend space camp at any point in his youth. But was it so sad, really, that Gyro might at best forfeit a lucrative career behind some desk at a satellite control room, when his goal was never tied to a particular industry? His goal was to bounce and feel weightless. As a 7-year-old, Gyro was ill-equipped to determine what occupation should consume the bulk of his waking life. Besides, his dream would probably be better achieved as a trapeze artist, skydiving instructor, or maybe just as a guy who owns a trampoline. And though the words hadn't passed through his shaken little brain yet, Gyro had an inkling of a thought which, even under the influence of painkillers, was a smart one. Perhaps not every pursuit ought to be channeled into a career, or a lifestyle, or even a purchase. Life is simply an ongoing experience. I don't need to escape the physical stratosphere to free myself from the pressures of this highly commodified world and its capitalist propaganda. Today, I rise out of the ashes from whence I first arose, for I am cosmonaut of the universe, and I won't sell out to petty earthlings who dream of nothing more than sweet release from this mortal coil. You've been excellent listeners. Thank you for hearing this original story about chasing your dreams. Stay swell.